Well, hello everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. I want to welcome you to the Southern College of Optometry webinar and interview skills. We're excited to have a great group of students, prospective optometry students on the line for this workshop. I believe we have students who are working on their applications and going through the interview process this fall, students who are thinking about doing that next year or into the future. Everyone is welcome, and we're glad you're here. We hope that you get something out of this session today. So first, let me say hello. My name is Rebecca Griffin. I am the Student Services and Admissions Officer here at Southern College of Optometry. I'm a little bit new to the position, so if any of you sat through webinars last year, you would have heard the voice of Mike McKeever. He's still with the institution, but has moved over to our Hayes Center. So I've been here now since August, and I'm happy to be working with students who are interested in SEO and optometry in general. I actually come from Michigan, so made a little bit of a move to get here to Memphis, but I'm really loving the city and really loving the SEO community. So that's a little bit about myself. Before I introduce our lead presenter, I did want to do a quick shameless plug for some of our next events that we'll have in October. First of all, SEO will be participating in the ASCO virtual fair. ASCO is the Association of Schools and Colleges of Optometry, and they're bringing together admissions representatives from many of the optometry schools across the country to be present during the virtual fair to talk via web-based chat with students who are interested in learning more about the school. So I'll be there sitting in to chat with anyone who has questions, and I hope that you consider joining us. That will be on October 4th throughout the day. And then our next webinar will be Wednesday, October 25th at 4 o'clock Central Time. And that webinar topic is strengthening your application and will be hosted by the SEO Director of Admissions, Mike Robertson. So I hope you consider joining us for one or both of those events. And without further ado, let me introduce our lead presenter today, Mr. Joe Hauser. He is our Vice President of Student Services. He's been here at SEO for quite some time, 26 years to be exact, in various capacities here in Student Services, but always working with students, doing admissions, conducting interviews, and in my conversations with Mr. Hauser, it's very clear that is what he's most passionate about, is helping great quality students get here to SEO. He's a born and raised Memphian. He got his BBA and MBA from right here at the University of Memphis, and I know he's an avid Tigers fan. So again, without further ado, Mr. Hauser, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks, Rebecca, and welcome, students. You have a great advocate in Ms. Griffin. Moving forward, any questions that you may have, certainly reach out to her. I will plug next month's review with Mr. Robertson. If you think, if you like this session, Mr. Robertson has 50 times the personality that I have, so I can't imagine it'll be a very lively discussion, and I'm sure you'll learn quite a bit. So I guess as far as common questions with the interview that we get a lot, SEO, we know there's different interview styles of the different optometry schools and different health professions. And one of the things I'm always a big advocate of is what are we looking for in our interview. It is a one-on-one closed file interview, and that kind of shapes how the interviewer will ask you questions. So starting off, and we'll cover all of this, one of the things that we look for in an interview, because it is a closed file, the interviewer will not be asking you about your grades, will not be critiquing you about maybe a C or D you made your sophomore year or sections on the OAT. They'll be asking you more open-ended questions. Why optometry? Why are you looking at SEO? What we're looking for is if you're able to tell your story and communicate your attributes to us, we feel that's a good assessment of how you may be successful in a clinical setting. So that when you are dealing with patients, you're able to communicate with Mrs. Jones and explain to her what's going on with her eyes, why is she complaining of certain symptoms, and what are you as the doctor going to be doing to remedy that. So in preparing for the interview day, you want to kind of go over your own story. Why optometry, why SEO. It never hurts to do a little background or research on the college. You can go to our website and review more stuff about the college, what we emphasize. You will, because that will impress the interviewer. The more you know about us is a sign of interest. The interview day itself has several things. The interview is the biggest thing, but since it's a closed file interview, you will also have a counseling session. In fact, Ms. Griffin is one of our admissions counselors that will go over your open file. Make sure you have your prerequisites completed, any strengths, weaknesses about the college. You'll get a tour given by one of our students, which actually that's a pretty large part of the interview day. See the entire campus. You can ask the student questions about why they chose SEO. If you see anything on campus that strikes a question, you certainly can ask the students to clarify. And then you also have a financial aid and housing session, learning where students live, as well as the budget process and how to borrow funds and what kind of costs are going to be associated. Typically, when you hear back after the interview will be within a week, but some of that depends upon the strength of your file. If you have everything completed versus, oh, I'm still lacking letters of recommendation, or I still haven't sent in my most up-to-date transcript, that may cause the admissions committee to delay a little bit at getting back with you. If you have everything completed, typically you will hear back from the committee within 1 week of the interview day.
And before we move forward and go into these topics a little bit deeper, I would just like to mention that there is a chat function available for the webinar. So any other questions you have along the way, feel free to type right there in the chat box your questions to send to us. We will gather the questions and answer those at the end of the session.
Very good. As far as essentials for the interview, one of the things that will definitely come up is the interviewer will talk to you or ask you to clarify about your experience in the field, whether that's working, shadowing, talking with optometrists, also maybe with other healthcare providers. If you were pre-med your first 2 years of college and then you became interested in optometry, it's perfectly fine to talk to the interviewer about any shadowing or experience you had with other healthcare providers before you determined optometry. In fact, some interviewers may ask you, what kind of process did you have to come to optometry? Did you explore medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, etc.? So talking about your experience in shadowing and or work, you will want to be prepared for that, to talk about details of the different offices and shadowing experience. And you certainly want to have a good bit of shadowing. The more you have, the more you have to talk about and the better impression that you will have. Do you have the discipline to succeed? Primarily academically. It's always going to be an adjustment going from undergrad, where maybe a heavy load is 17, 18 hours, to optometry school, where you're taking as much as 23, 24 hours, and they're all sciences. So the interviewer may ask you questions about time management and how you have demonstrated academic discipline in the past, so that it will prepare you for success as an optometry student. And then different interviewers have different ways of asking your thoughts on the future, as well as the current state of healthcare, whether it's talking about the Affordable Care Act, whether it's talking about Medicare, Medicaid, whether it's talking about your own state, because different states have different laws in which an optometrist can do, and that's perfectly fine. But you may want to be prepared, if you're from Ohio, learning about what is the Ohio law of what an optometrist can do, maybe in comparison to Tennessee or other states. As I mentioned before, you want to be prepared to discuss your work and shadowing experience. If rule of thumb, we like for you, in fact, sometimes Mr. Robertson, who determines if you're invited for an interview, if you have a good academic file, maybe even a great academic file, but you've only demonstrated shadowing in one practice, he'll probably send you a note, an email saying, we really suggest that you get more before coming for an interview. But typically, rule of thumb, we like for you to have been exposed to at least 3 different practices so that you can compare, contrast how different optometrists practice, and be prepared to talk about, whether it's work or shadowing, what the doctors have shown you and what you have seen as far as the practice. Sometimes these practices can be high pressure situations, or even high pressure academically. Sometimes an interviewer will ask you to talk about maybe a stressful or a something that you've had to overcome as far as either academic load, or it could be something even personal, like unfortunately a death in the family, or an illness, or something that you had to overcome during your 4 years of undergrad. We like to see one being adaptable and able to roll with change. Kind of like high pressure circumstances, you want to demonstrate that you've stayed busy in undergrad, whether it be work, whether it be involved with student activities, or just carrying a heavy academic load. We want to make sure that you've demonstrated that you've handled pressure or challenges, because we certainly don't want someone to enter optometry school and a few weeks or a few months into it, this is just too hard, I'm going to quit. And very few people do that. We have a 98% graduation rate, and I think a lot of that is because we evaluate in the interview, has this applicant, before coming to SEO, have they really been able to demonstrate that they can handle challenges and pressure situations. And sometimes an interviewer will ask you about, what are you willing to sacrifice? And that may sound like an odd question, but if an undergrad, hey, I played golf 3 afternoons every week, or I enjoyed doing this, or I enjoyed traveling, and you might still be able to do those, but you just might be able to do less of it while you're in optometry school. So that's just something that the interviewer may talk to you about. You may not be able to spend as much time with your family because you're going to be away from home. So there's just things that you might have to be willing to say, hey, this is important enough to me that I'm going to still, I may have to give up a few things in order to make sure I'm a successful academic student. You may give an example of your ability to balance life and school, whether it's, again, work or involved with student organizations while you're carrying a full load of courses. This is just something that, again, shows the discipline for you to become. I always like to tell students, only 1% of the country has a doctorate degree. If it were easy and everyone could do it, it wouldn't be as worthwhile. So one of the things that we really focus on is trying to select students who not only have the academic ability, but who we feel are going to be able to make it through the program. Again, you want to demonstrate your experience as far as shadowing and work within the profession. They may even ask you questions about assessing your desire to be an optometrist. And again, the more experience exposure that you have, in my humble opinion, shows that desire. So a lot of questions may talk me about how much you have academically, you're carrying a heavy academic load, taking 16, 17, 18 hours with several science classes, but also complementing that with being involved with student organizations, community outreach or community organizations, charity, philanthropy, and then certainly any work shadowing that you've had within the profession. Doing your homework. Before the interview, the more you can demonstrate that you're prepared, it's going to make a more favorable impression. I always tell applicants that you're going to be interviewed by an optometrist. You're trying to join their club, in essence. So what will make an impression upon an optometrist would be if you have done your homework about the field of optometry. Would certainly make them more favorable or inclined to write a favorable recommendation. anything that you can do to demonstrate that you're aware of the commitment involved of optometry school, that it is going to be a heavier course load than what you had in undergrad, that you have evaluated the current status of healthcare, if both from a financial as well as a work dynamic. Optometrists make a very good living. You can expect a good income. You might not make $1 million every year. Or if someone says, oh, I want to make $1 million and only work 10 hours a week, well, that's not very realistic as far as being an optometrist. So those are things that can sometimes make an impression, good or bad, upon the interviewer. And again, we stated earlier, but having an overall knowledge of the healthcare systems, whether it be the Affordable Care Act, whether it be state laws, of what an optometrist can do and awareness of other states, would also make a favorable impression, showing that you've done your homework.
Mr. Hauser, do you have any recommendations for resources that students could consult to learn a little bit more about the field, such as professional journals or otherwise?
I'm a big believer in grassroots. You learn more on the local level. And so, like, for example, if you're in a smaller town or in a rural part of, let's say, Illinois, talking to an optometrist from that part would probably give you a better landscape than talking to an optometrist in New York City. So I think that if you talk with any of the local optometrists that you shadowed, whether it's back home or at the college you're attending, those doctors would give you a great resource. Most optometry areas, geographical, have what's called societies. So like using the Southern Illinois example, that if you're going to college at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, there's probably a Southern Illinois Optometric Society. And if your local optometrist were to invite you to one of their meetings, it's usually a dinner. You get a free meal for one, but also it may allow you to learn more about the landscape of optometry in Southern Illinois, which might be more germane than again, learning about how optometry is practiced in a large city like New York. So I really believe in the grassroots of learning with your local areas. There are publications. The AOA news is public and has a lot of information about what's going on in the profession. So I think that's kind of the Optometry 101 would be the AOA news. But read that and complement that with your information from local optometrists.
I think that makes a lot of sense and is a great recommendation, especially because we talk so frequently about how optometry is a legislated field. And I wonder if you could just comment or give a few examples of why that's so important and meaningful and why students need to understand why optometry is such a legislated field.
Yes. Each state board is regulated by the state. So an optometrist, even if you graduate from Southern College of Optometry in Tennessee and you go to Georgia to practice, the Georgia State Board will determine what you as an optometrist can or cannot do. So two things. You want to be mindful of the school that you select to make sure that that school is going to prepare you clinically to practice at the most advanced level of where you wish to practice. But also, like a lot of things politically, the more you get involved, the better the law in your state will be. Some states recently, Kentucky and Louisiana come to mind, have really expanded their scope of practice because the optometrists and students got very involved in lobbying for these advanced procedures. So sometimes when an interviewer will ask you in talking about this, they're kind of getting an idea or flavor if you are aware that this is a legislated profession and that you as a future optometrist are very much vested in the more that you participate, the more you get involved, the better it's going to be for your state law. So they really stress, the older generation really stresses to the younger generation, when you graduate, become a member of your state association, become a member of AOA, because it does help continue to promote the profession and increase what an optometrist can do.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, so I guess a little bit about the admissions process. For those of you that have already applied, you're probably already aware of this. You submit your Optomcast, the centralized application that all optometry schools require, and then your SEO supplemental application, which for those that have applied, hopefully would echo this. It only takes about 5 or 10 minutes to submit SEO's supplemental application, but that gets the ball rolling, and make sure that you submit the supporting documents, because if you submit your transcript, your application without transcripts or OAT scores or letters of recommendation, it's going to cause a delay in our getting back with you. Once we receive your Optomcast and SEO application, we process it and review it. Typically, that's Mike Robertson, and he does an initial review to see about your strengths. He'll get back with you, like I mentioned earlier, if he sees or senses that, well, your academics look good, but maybe you need a little extra shadowing. He'll shoot you an email and let you know that. But after he does his initial review, he'll determine, and sometimes he'll get feedback from me and others on the committee to determine if he wants to invite you for an admissions interview, and gives you the instructions on how you set that up. You get the choice of several dates from which to choose, so it's not like you must come on the one day that he offers you. You get many options, so you can look at your calendar and determine which is the best interview day for you. You then come for your on-campus interview, which includes, like I said, not only the interview, but tour and financial aid and housing. And then usually within a week of the interview, our admissions committee will meet. We met yesterday, and then evaluate the files and make decisions, and then we notify the applicants if they are accepted, usually by phone. And then this time of year, if a student were accepted, you get 8 weeks to decide if you wish to submit a tuition deposit to hold your spot in that class. As we get later in the year, the 8 weeks whittles down to 5 weeks and 3 weeks and so forth, so on. But that is another part of the process you want to keep in mind.
And Mr. Hauser, one of the things we recommend students to do is apply early. Could you speak a little bit to the yearly cycle or the timeline, and offer recommendations to when students who haven't already started or might be applying for the future should start their application?
Sure. Apply early is critical, because one of the things I think applicants make a calculated mistake on is they're waiting for the perfect time to apply, or maybe even take the perfect time to take the OAT. There really may not be a perfect time. Even if you're still lacking a prerequisite, or you're taking the OAT next week or retaking the OAT a month from now, it behooves you to go ahead and get the application in early, meaning July, August, September, or now, if you're applying for the 2018 cycle, because we can't do anything until you've applied. And we will know if you're worried, well, I'm worried about the OAT, so I don't want to apply too early, and then y'all may reject me because I had a marginal OAT score and I need to retake it. That's a logical thought. However, we're not going to do that. If you apply and we know that you're retaking the OAT a month from now, or taking it for the first time a month from now, it still allows us to process your application and have everything ready, so that when that OAT score does come in, we can act upon your file much sooner. It also gives Mr. Robertson the opportunity to evaluate your file and give you recommendations if needed. If you apply early, it gives him the opportunity to communicate with you on, John, you might want to go back and take second organic, or you might want to take a few more biology classes based upon your grades, or based upon your overall file, or more shadowing. If he does not have the application, it's hard for him to give you that constructive feedback. It always looks better applying early. It's an indication that you're on top of things, and that's how we receive it as a committee.
Excellent, thank you. And I'd just like to add and echo a little bit about the on-campus interview. We are asked sometimes whether it's mandatory for students to come on campus for the interview, and our answer to that question is always yes. One thing I'd like to mention in regards to that is that the interview is just important for us to get to know you as it is for you to get to know us. So by coming to campus, you get to meet staff, you get to meet faculty and students here at SEO, you get to tour our campus, and you get to see whether you feel like you're a mesh and a fit for the campus environment. So it is a really valuable experience for you, and we hope you take advantage of it and make the most of it. In relation to that as well, I always recommend for students who aren't from the area and maybe haven't been to Memphis before, if you're coming on campus for the interview, to spend some time here in the city. Spend a night or at least, an afternoon and evening so you can try some of the amazing food, the barbecue, so you can explore Midtown, go see where some of our students are living, and just get a feel for the Memphis community and vibe, because it's a place, if you're accepted and you accept your spot here, you'll be living here for at least 4 years. So that's a recommendation I have as well.
And a very good one.
All right. Now, moving forward.
Okay. Kind of like thinking of the application cycle. As I mentioned, once you apply, Mr. Robertson will review your file to determine if he wishes to invite you for an interview. One of the things to keep in mind, if you're invited for an interview, you've sort of cleared one hurdle. We don't invite a certain number just for the sake to say we invited 300 people or whatever number it may be. It's really, we only invite you if we feel, or certainly Mr. Robertson feels, that you have a legitimate chance for acceptance. So you're invited for the interview after the initial review, and then, as I mentioned earlier, it's a blind or closed file interview. So the interviewer, it's one-on-one, so it's not a panel, will not have any preconceived thoughts. He or she will not know, are you a 4.0 student or a 3.0 student? A spectacular OAT or a pretty good OAT? A ton of experience or marginal experience? They will not know that. And that's obviously intentional. After the interview, you will have a counseling session, again, like Ms. Griffin is one of our counselors, that will go over your open file that obviously isn't covered in the interview, talking about any trends with your transcript. If you had any low grades, were there any reasons behind that? Any low sections on the OAT, it gives you the opportunity to talk about that a little bit. And then again, the housing and financial aid session. We're big believers in trying to prepare you for the kind of debt. Even though SEO's debt is significantly less in some cases than some of our sister institutions. This may be your first real venture into financial aid, so we want to really make sure that you are aware of what to expect as far as a student budget and potential debt, and also where to live, as Ms. Griffin mentioned about looking at the city on your interview day to kind of see, and we'll give you recommendations on where students live. So if you want to see them firsthand, you can certainly do that. And then the end of the cycle is your file with the recommendation from the interviewer goes to the admissions committee, and the admissions committee evaluates your file and renders a decision. We've referenced again to be prepared for the interview. A lot of questions that you can probably predict, but we'll go ahead and go through them, that you can kind of expect from the interview. Is the interviewer may ask you, tell me about yourself. The interviewer may want to know a little bit more about you as a person than numbers, or, oh, I'm a biology major. Talk about what really motivates you or that's important to you. Certainly, why you want to be an optometrist. That's not a one-size-fits-all question. Certainly different answers, but in your heart of hearts, what has compelled you to pursue optometry. If you didn't do optometry, what would you do? Is certainly another commonly asked question. Not so much that we're suggesting that you're not going to get in, but we think it's healthy. Well, if you didn't get into optometry school, what would you do? Is kind of an insight into your process of determining. So, like for example, if you consider other health fields, and said, oh, if I don't get into optometry school, I will look at other health fields. That's an indication that you again have done your due diligence and homework. One of the questions I like to ask sometimes is, if you were a fly on the wall on the admissions committee, what would you like for us to know about you that may not be on paper? In other words, is there anything else for you that you'd like to add or share to your file? Be yourself. We want you to be prepared, but not rehearsed, and that can be a delicate balance. We don't want for you to be stiff or robotic. The whole idea of the interview day is to be an evaluation of who you are as a person. So it's perfectly good and natural and expected for you to be prepared, but don't feel like you have to memorize every answer to the questions. We do want for this to be a natural conversation and for you to be able to have a normal discussion with the interviewer.
And just to echo what Mr. Hauser is saying, I also love to encourage students to be themselves. If you think about the fact that a lot of optometry schools are interviewing a lot of students, we see a lot of students, we talk to a lot of students, so we want to know what it is that makes you unique. So definitely be yourself and try to imagine what's unique about you in comparison to some of the other students we might be interviewing. Mr. Hauser, would you mind commenting a little bit on what students can do the actual day of in terms of, I guess, what should students wear, and should students show up early, and can they bring guests, those sorts of questions?
The real questions. Yes. We don't have a strict dress code. In other words, if you're not wearing a tuxedo, you're not dinged or anything like that. Most of the students, for the males, will wear a coat and tie. It certainly doesn't have to be designer or anything like that. It's just an indication that you're taking this seriously. It's almost kind of like if you're going to a job interview, you typically will dress nicer than just kind of hanging out in your apartment. For the ladies, an appropriate dress or business suit would be certainly appropriate. You don't want to stand out either way, either too casual, but certainly want to be making the impression that, hey, I'm serious about this, I'm dressing to be this way. Usually showing up about 15 to 20 minutes early. So if it's an 8:45 interview, showing up at like 8:25 or 8:30 is appropriate. You don't want to get here 2 hours beforehand because we really wouldn't have a place to put you. But you also don't want to be 10 minutes late because the interview sometimes is very early in the day, and you don't want to make your interviewer late. If you're flying in and your flight gets delayed or anything like that, or a connection, shoot us an email or call us. We certainly understand if you're having logistical problems, or if your car breaks down driving over in the morning, or you have a flat tire or something like that. We certainly understand those aspects, but certainly contact us if and when that happens. As far as guests, I'm going to answer this with a question for you. It's perfectly fine for you to bring parents, spouse, significant others, sibling. It's not required. But here's what I would say to you is in the form of a question. What will make you more comfortable? As a parent myself, I have 3 children. If I went along with my oldest son to an interview, he would probably cringe. My other 2 children probably would want me to. So I say this first and foremost is, will having your parents with you help or hinder? and I can't answer that. But usually, again, most parents would certainly would be a help, but only you can answer if that would put you in a better mindset or more stressful mindset. I personally like having parents because on your trip back, you can talk to your mom and dad about what they saw on the interview day, what they saw on tour, so you can have a dialogue. But don't feel like you have to invite anybody. I would invite more than 2 or 3 at the most. We don't want to have the whole clan there. That can be a little odd if you bring 15 people for the interview day. But having parents or a sibling or a spouse or a significant other is perfectly fine. During the interview itself, some things that you might want to be thinking about. Remember, the interviewer is assessing your answers, your behavior, your professionalism, your communication skills. So you want their job to be easy. So first of all, one of the things you want to do is really answer their questions. If they ask you a direct question, don't go off on a tangent about something else. Answer the question. That will enable them, I think, to have a better assessment. When the interviewer assesses, was the applicant energetic, enthusiastic, pleasant? You don't have to be an extrovert, or certainly you don't want to be over the top. You don't want to be silly or giddy, but you want to give the impression, whether it's body language, you don't be slumped over in your chair like you really don't care to be here. You want your body language to give the impression that, hey, I'm really excited about being here. We understand that you're going to be nervous. That's fine. There's a difference between nervous and apathetic. But we want for you to, again, to answer the questions that the interviewer provides you. You want to give the impression that, hey, I'm really serious about this. I'm really excited about being here with a chance to pursue optometry. Again, in answering the question, you don't want the interviewer to have to follow up a second, third, or fourth time for the same question. That'll be frustrating to the interviewer. So if the interviewer keeps asking you about, well, how many practices have you shadowed? And you avoid the topic or you answer around the question, they're going to have to probably answer it over and over and over again. And that might be frustrating to the interviewer if they have to ask the same question 3 times to get the answer. So those are just things that you want to be mindful of as far as giving the interviewer the impression. Also, don't hesitate to ask them questions. As an interviewer myself, I'm sometimes as impressed, if not more, by the questions that you have for me about, well, why do I think SEO is a great school? Or if you were in my shoes, what should I be looking for in an optometry school, or about SEO or the city of Memphis or things like that? That's another indication that you've done your homework and that you care.
And one recommendation I might suggest to you all is to see if you're currently in school, if your career services office can facilitate a mock interview, because practicing these skills, even if the questions aren't the same as what you'll be answering during the actual interview, can be a really valuable thing to do to work out some of the jitters, to make sure you come across in that pleasant and energetic way. So certainly check and see what resources your career services or a similar office you have on campus might be able to offer you.
And something else that this may sound a little hokey, but if you did kind of like a mock interview with a friend and record it, because you may not be aware once you see yourself on video, wow, my body posture was really odd. I had no idea. I slumped over when I was talking, or I was very jittery, or I was not really answering the question. The video doesn't lie. So if you were to record yourself, it may give you some tips on some behavior that you may not be aware that you're doing, but seeing it on video allows you to, oh, I didn't realize I came across this stiff, or I didn't realize I came across as apathetic as I was slumped over in my chair, and certainly you don't want to give that impression. And then as far as next steps after the interview, a question we get sometimes is, should you follow up with the interview, with the interviewer? My answer to that is, whenever I get a very simple thank you, or it's very nice to meet you, I enjoyed my time, right after the interview, that's very well received. Also, I'm not saying that you have to do this, but sending a very simple thank you note written is always well received. Maybe it's generational, but my generation and older tend to like when the applicant takes the time to send a handwritten note of appreciation. It's always very well received. A question sometimes is, how do you accept, delay, or decline? Like, once you're accepted, or if you were accepted to SEO, like I said, this time of year you get 8 weeks to decide if you wish to accept our offer by submitting a deposit. You'll be hearing back from other schools too. Not to sound cocky, but SEO has a higher standard than many of our peer institutions. It's harder to get into SEO sometimes than some of our peer institutions. So if you're getting into SEO, you're getting into other schools too. So sometimes the question is that, well, I've been accepted to SEO, that's great, but I've decided to go to another school. Once you make that decision, sending us an email, just letting us know, hey, thank you so much. I appreciate the offer, but I've decided to go to XYZ School of Optometry. Well, that releases that seat of yours and allows us to consider someone else. So it is a courtesy that if you were to decide to go to a different school, certainly if you find out before your interview that you've been accepted to another school and that's the school where you wish to attend, letting us know as soon as possible, because it is unprofessional, in my opinion, to simply no-show for an interview, especially if you've known in advance that, oh, I've decided to go to a different school. Sending us a quick email to let us know that is the courteous and professional way to handle that. And then, as far as next steps, certainly contacting us by email or calling us is certainly available to you. If you're not immediately accepted, but we're asking you to follow up on something, addressing that is always well received versus pretending it doesn't exist. So if we say, well, hey, everything else is good, but we really want for you to get some more shadowing hours, and then the committee will reconvene and make a decision on your file. Get the hours. Don't pretend like it doesn't exist, or maybe they'll forget about that. We won't. But if you address it promptly, that will be another favorable interpretation by the committee on your behalf.
All right, so we've come to the end of our formal presentation. If you have any sort of questions, go ahead and put those into the chat box now, and we're happy to answer those. And while you're typing in your questions, I just want to offer my contact information here. So again, I'm the Student Services and Admissions Officer here at SEO, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the SEO program or our admissions process, so on and so forth. So you can feel free to email me or give me a call anytime. I do a little bit of recruiting, so I might see you at your college campuses out on the road, or maybe you'll see another one of our admissions officers. So what I'd encourage you to do is check out our Twitter or our Facebook. I have our Twitter handle there because we often post about different places we're visiting, different events we're doing, and we certainly keep our Twitter followers updated on all of the webinars and other events that we have that you can attend online. So as I mentioned earlier, today we have the virtual fair on October 4th. Again, that's something that I'll be sitting and participating in for several hours that day. You can pop in and it's basically a web-based chat. So you can answer questions, or you can ask your questions, and you can also see what other students are asking. Maybe they have a question you hadn't thought of, and you can read their response there. Our next webinar will be October 24th. We're trying to mix up the days and times so that more students can attend based on different schedules. So this one will be at 4 o'clock on that day, and the topic is strengthening your application. The lead presenter will be Mr. Robertson, Mike Robertson, who is our Director of Admissions, and he's been at SEO for many years and has been working in an admissions capacity the entire time, so he has a wealth of knowledge and information to pass along to you all. So I'm not seeing any questions at this point in time, so we'll end the presentation now. Thank you, Mr. Hauser, for all the great information. Hopefully you all feel really good about moving forward and taking next steps. And once again, any kind of questions that you have, I'll be here in the office for the next couple hours, so you can give me a buzz on the phone or shoot me an email. So thanks again, Mr. Hauser.
Well, one thing I'd just like to add is that as you submit your application, whether it be this year or in the future year, if you develop questions, one of the things that's pretty easy for us to do is match you with a current student that might be from your alma mater or your area or a different common thread. So if you're, for example, if you're from Wisconsin and you're attending college at University of Wisconsin at Madison, and you have some questions, but you just really like to talk to a student before coming for your interview, it's not a challenge at all for us to get you in touch. In this case, with a current student from University of Wisconsin. So one of the nice things about having, I think we have 42 or 43 states represented in the student body, it's pretty easy for us to match you with somebody. And if that helps you get a better feel or vibe of the college before the interview day, that's a good thing.
Definitely, great recommendation. So again, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I guess, Mr. Hauser, we must have did a good job with all the information presented.
That's how I'm interpreting it.
All right, well, have a nice day, everybody, and we hope to see you either on October 4th or tuning in on the 24th.
And students, I appreciate your attendance.